tasty treats.
In the 1980s, a man from Michigan came up with a brilliant idea about a group of friends who travel to a cabin and awaken an evil creature. During their struggle, they become haunted by the returning dead, some of them their own friends, and one of them loses a hand. An evil witch-like monster appears before finally the group is able to seal the portal to hell. Oh no, I'm not talking about Evil Dead. I'm talking about Frostbiter, Wrath of the Wendingo, a movie with so much Evil Dead DNA that in Japan the movie was released under the title Evil Dead 3: The Last Chapter. This is not Evil Dead 3 or any other part of the series, so you can watch it on your own. The actual plot to this movie, though, is the Guardian, a very superhero name, is inadvertently killed by some drunk hunters. This frees the Wendingo to bring about death and destruction. The Guardian contacts the next caretaker through the veil in order to tell them to place the creature back in its prison before it takes over the world. While at the same time, the drunk hunters prepare themselves for a siege by the Wendigo's servants. In 1987, Tom Chaney had a dream, or a nightmare to some, to make a movie that followed in the footsteps of another great Michiganite, Sam Raimi. Starting his work in February of 1987, after graduating from Eastern Michigan a year earlier, he moved to Chelsea, Michigan, purchased some rental offices, labeled it Excalibur Motion Pictures, and invested $17,000 from his own pocket to jumpstart the project. Wait, you can leave college with money?
What did you do?
Even though work began in 1987, the movie wouldn't be released until 8 years later by Troma. One of the reasons for this is Chaney, who spent $17,000, was a little broke for years after working on the film. So Kodak, the camera company, heard about his project and helped him develop his film with a pay-as-you-go plan. Principal photography was finished in the late 1980s, but Chaney spent the next 3 years on special effects, sound, and film development. Now let's cover the monster, the Wendingo. The Wendingo is an Algonquin creature that is usually described as the manifestation of human greed and gluttony, which I think the movie could have leaned a little more into, either through creature design or movie narrative. Chaney's creature, though, is more mystical, with a legend that's not nearly explored, and a sacred creature prison that lies inside a circle of skulls on Skull Island in Michigan. Speaking of Michigan, Frostbiter was shot all over Michigan, not just Skull Island. That includes Dearborn, Livanoa, Hutton's Lake, and apparently even Chaney's neighbor's backyard, which doubled as the film's hellhole set. Oddly, the production did not film on Manitowoc Island, where the story takes place, which is also unfortunate because I really wanted to know which island to dodge, North, South, or regular Manitowoc Island. Back to the monster. Wendigo's actual time on screen is very short. Its first glimpse is that of a giant blue fist, and then some sweet camera shots, Raimi style, and finally a claymation monster that originally got its start on Chaney's mother's kitchen table before it was beaten by the power of force lightning. Hey, that's Star Wars. But back to Chaney and the Wendingo itself. Originally, the creature was far less ambitious. Early on, it was basically just a giant blue monster head. But after a lot of phone calls and probably a fair amount of begging, Chaney managed to bring in several Michigan special effects artists to help expand the creature into something much bigger. One of the most important contributors was Gary Jones of Livona Acme Special Effects, who had previously worked on Moontrap. Jones rebuilt the Wendigo's hand, added movement mechanics, and worked on various creature effects and even helped create the film's wonderfully, and slightly funny, puppet chili monsters, which somehow is a real sentence about an actual movie. Another major contributor was Dave Hedimer, also connected to Moontrap and also from Livona, because apparently all Michigan practical effects artists legally had to live there in the late 1980s. Using a miniature cast and a 10-inch Xerox reference image, Hedimer completely resculpted the Wendigo's body and head before bringing it to life through Ray Harryhausen's inspired stop-motion animation. And according to production stories, filming the creature's brief screen time took nearly 7 months. And finally, Ed Woolman of, guess where? The Vona Illumination Effects handled many of the film's optical effects, including the movie's gloriously over-the-top forced lightning attack, which feels less inspired by Algonquian folklore and more somebody watched Return of the Jedi 5 minutes before filming. The last thing I want to talk about is the film itself, and I mean the actual physical film. Like many low-budget productions of the era, Frostbiter was primarily shot on 16mm to save money. But some of the effects and animation elements were shot on 35mm instead, which allowed for cleaner optical work, better composition, and more image detail during effects processing. The problem was that combining all of this together wasn't easy, especially for a tiny independent production slowly assembling itself over the course of several years. Matching color, exposure, grain, and lighting between different film elements was painstaking work, particularly when effect shots were being optically combined and reprocessed multiple times. And while researching the production, I educated myself on certain things. I finally figured out why parts of the movie occasionally have strange scratches or shadows or flickering artifacts, as they're called, near the bottom of the frame. For some, it may look like shadows of blades of grass. Because editing physical film in 1980s and early 90s was an exhausting hands-on process. The footage would run through flatbed editing machines like Steinbeck's or KM systems that have massive table-size editing units with spinning plates and projection viewers and sound heads and manual cutting controls and all that fun stuff. Every slice, cut, and transfer and handling pass introduced the possibility of scratches, dust, tears, or just simple film wear. For a major studio, that was manageable. For a small group of filmmakers in Michigan slowly finishing a movie piece by piece over nearly a decade, it became a part of the movie itself. And honestly, there's something kind of admirable about that. The imperfections, the grain, the rough edges, they don't just feel like technical flaws. They feel like actual evidence that the movie survived being made. Also, shout out to Gary Sorensen of Sin Makers, who I don't know if they're still around or if this is them or what, but he deserves praise for showing up when the movie was 70% done and funding the final stretch of production. It allowed Channing and his producer, Matt Theory, to quit their job and finish the movie by 1992. I know what you're thinking, but the movie came out in 1995. Yes, that's correct. That's when Trauma helped release it. But the film itself was finished in 1992. It sat in limbo for another 3 years before finally getting distribution. So the fact that it exists at all after everything it's gone through is astounding. But all the behind-the-scenes passion in the world can't fully protect a movie from its influences. Nearly a decade of production struggles, homemade effects, frozen film reels, and pure Michigan horror ambition. Was Frostbiter actually worth all the effort? Honestly, yeah. At least partially. The movie has a weird charm to it. The energy almost never drops. The atmosphere is surprisingly effective at times. And even the rougher moments are usually carried by sheer enthusiasm behind everything happening on screen. But Frostbiter also runs into its biggest problem. It wants to be Evil Dead so badly that it rarely feels confident about being its own movie. There's a difference between being inspired by something and recreating it beat for beat. You can absolutely love Star Wars and build your own sci-fi world around the things that you admire, but if your movie ends with a young hero flying down a trench to destroy a massive superweapon, you probably crossed the line from homage into imitation. The Frostbiter crosses the line way too enthusiastically, which is frustrating because the final sequence briefly reveals something genuinely unique hiding underneath all the Raimi worship. For a few moments, you can actually see a movie Frostbiter could have become if it trusted its own identity a little more. Now, would the movie have been cornier if it leaned into the Guardian, the prophecy, and more mystical fantasy elements? Absolutely. It probably would have felt more like a low budget Power Rangers episode than, a genuine horror movie. But I think that would have helped the movie stand apart more, because Frostbiter spends so much time trying to recreate the Evil Dead that large sections stop feeling inspired by it and start feeling trapped underneath it. The returning dead friends, the witch-like creature attacks, the cabin setting, the broken sacred rite. So many story beats feel pulled directly from Raimi's playbook without enough reinterpretation to make it feel distinct. And that's frustrating because whenever Frostbite drifts away from Evil Dead, it immediately becomes more interesting. Now, I do have to say that unique and interesting does not mean good. It just means different. The giant bird creature attacking the plane. Goofy and memorable. Sure, the set piece was nothing more than a children's toy hung in the air and a claymation giant bird attacking it, but it wasn't Evil Dead. The chili monsters? Those feel closer to Gremlins than Evil Dead. And that slight tonal shift suddenly gives the movie a little bit more personality for a while. Even the Wendigo itself has a creature design that feels genuinely unique. I could probably find something similar, but when you take the chili monster, the bird, and the Wendigo, you have originality. And honestly, I think the movie was closer to finding its identity than it realized. Because Frostbiter already had major things Evil Dead didn't. It was in the snow. It was in the Michigan winter. And what it could have been was quiet. Like dead quiet. That snow quiet that you only get. The movie keeps brushing up against a version of itself that feels far more original. Something built around a regional winter horror instead of a constant Evil Dead homage. Imagine if the cabin had been a remote ice fishing shack instead of another generic woodland cabin. Imagine if the silence of the snow became a part of the horror before the creatures attacked. That our survivors don't know when the creatures are going to attack because everything is silent and quiet, and then boom! Suddenly the movie stops feeling like an imitation, and now it feels like a homage filtered through its own identity of Michigan and the filmmaker's choices. It's not Evil Dead. And I'm not going to mention the acting or the writing. It's a B movie. The acting isn't meant to be on par with Evil Dead, let alone The Godfather. The writing, because it's derivative, ignores chunks of the story that they could have told in order to replicate Evil Dead moments. The movie was too afraid to explore the Guardian lore, which could have been a 1,000-year-old story. Nor do they tell us why the Guardian is so old and why he's still alive. Does the creature pack make him semi-immortal? Why is the island shaped like a skull? Why do we keep cutting to black and white newscasters? Yeah. So Frostbiter isn't a hidden masterpiece. It's a rough movie with derivative elements, awkwardly paced, and occasionally so obsessed with the Evil Dead that it forgets to trust its own ideas. But at the same time, there's something weirdly admirable and slightly unique about it. This was a movie pieced together over nearly half a decade, trying to build their own horror film with whatever resources they had available. Film reels were stored in freezers, stop-motion creatures sculpted on kitchen tables, and his mom's house at that. Effects artists slowly assembled monsters pieces by pieces. Chaney bringing in those same effect artists, phone call by phone call, piecing together his movie. Kodiak helping Chaney finish his film. Angel investors helping people quit their jobs just to finally finish the thing. And honestly, you can feel that effort on screen. Maybe not in the acting or writing, but in the effort. The fingerprint of hard work is present even on the film itself. Frostbiter may never fully escape the shadow of Evil Dead because it didn't attempt to, But buried underneath all the homage and imitation is a movie made by people who genuinely loved horror films and wanted to create one of their own. And sometimes that kind of passion can carry a movie further than polish ever could. Outside of that, you guys have a good one.